Welcome back to this panel discussion, the new generation of database, sponsored by MarkLogic on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com. Our guests today are Taha Kass-Hout. He's Chief Health Informatics Officer at the Food and Drug Administration. Kenneth Bible, Chief Technology Officer at the Marine Corps. Kevin Shelley, the Vice President for Public Sector at MarkLogic. And Cliff Dowse, Chief Information Architecture Division for the Army CIO. And as we left off, we were talking about some of the infrastructure issues that support data. Kenneth mentioned that you really can't carry around a database very easily in a war-torn situation, or especially in a place like Afghanistan. And Kevin was discussing the fact that you need to rationalize your storage so that there's some cost control there too, because even though it's getting cheaper, we're using it faster than it's getting cheaper, so it's not getting to be fewer dollars. So what I'd like to talk about is what some of the infrastructure strategies are to support the new data strategies we discussed earlier, and also how that can help you lower that operation and maintenance tail on the whole IT budget, which of course leaves more money for development and use of the data in a way that really moves the agency forward. So why don't we start, Cliff, with you again at the Army. What are you thinking about in terms of infrastructure optimization and lowering O&M so there's more money for development?
This is another area that Army leadership is committed towards to save the limited resources because of the reuse of infrastructure. So as part of the DoD and also the federal government, there's a federal data center consolidation initiative. The Army's leading the way in our Army data center consolidation, where right now we're tracking close to 1,100 data centers. But by consolidating those to a more manageable number, you do save obviously from personnel costs. There's green technologies that you save on. And this is part, again, of the overall DoD strategy. Now, the other portion of that is at the DoD level, they're moving towards core data centers. So there's guidance out there to move the applications across the DoD to these core data centers where you have, again, reuse and saving of cost.
And so what about cloud and DISA? Does that all come in? Is that a way of helping you consolidate and close data centers?
Yes, and our partnership with DISA, the Defense Information Systems Agency, is very close. And the Army partnering with DISA is doing a number of data initiatives, enterprise services, data center consolidation. So we are aligned with DISA.
And Taha, at FDA, there's been a kind of a revolution of IT because that was a spot that was sore for a long time. Now they've really attacked it in recent years. What's going on with respect to optimizing, getting O&M down, even as you update the infrastructure for what you need today?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. I mean, perhaps one thing we're seeing, I mean, establishment of a new office informatics and technology innovation, part of the restructure of our Office of Information Management, where we have the CIO is in charge of the technology delivery, and the CHIO, the Chief Health Informatics Officer, is more in charge of the innovation, figuring out new ways, how can we move into lower cost while achieving, the mission, dealing with variety of data and lots of it. Also mobility, be able to do business anywhere, not just carrying another mobile device. You could be in the field trying to do something, or sitting behind your desk all day, still be able to get the information to you at the right amount of time. So the strategy there was, as we work on the consolidation of the data centers and bringing costs down there, is also look across all the data that we have, separate those from the application, be able to do better master data management on what we have, and that'll buy some time for redesign of some systems, update the technology, figure out what is the right solution for that problem. Because when we looked at the big data, for example, the 3 Vs against the solutions, there was quite a bit of dichotomy where you had the solutions on this one corner and then the problems on this one corner. And that's really good for if you're trying to do analysis of certain things where you need data highly structured, but when you're dealing with the input of the data highly unstructured, you need different kind of tools to deal with that. So that was first acknowledge that gap, and this is really the first thing we did is try to address that gap about dealing with that different kind of data. Then the second thing was, okay, well, for example, if you're trying to run scientific computing, and there's so many capacity you can do with what you have in the data center, how can you burst from there to, for example, a cloud environment whether a government cloud or a private cloud, but be able to burst, use a few hours of those, save you years of compute hours, or save you yet another purchase of high-end computers to do a job that really requires a few hours. So that's sort of a new, it's not a new culture, but a new mindset that we had to work with the scientists and the reviewers and the IT department to sort of address that particular problem. And then becomes the issue about the sharing of that information. How can you, for example, work with the outside industry where you might need some scalability or might need different kind of interaction, is also try to address that. So we're sort of building the house and moving in it at the same time, but the way we're dealing with it is two lanes right now working hand in hand. How can we consolidate and reduce the O&M cost, while in the innovation lane try to address different things. And to us, innovation is not coming something 10 years from now. It's something that works now, but it might take folks, let's say, a day, a decade to get there, but something that actually works and address the problem right now. And this is where a lot of these cloud innovations comes in hand.
And Kenneth, the Marine Corps, you were talking about the difficulty of carrying everything with you in expeditionary situations. So are you looking back at some kind of a cloud infrastructure with reach back to a device? Is that kind of where you think you're headed?
Reach back has a pretty negative connotation to the operating forces. So I like to think of it in a little bit different context. I mentioned the private cloud computing environment strategy that the Marine Corps has and that we're working towards through one of our programs of record called McKeats, Marine Corps Enterprise IT Services, and it's housed at our IT center in Kansas City, the Marine Corps IT Center in Kansas City. That's really a centerpiece in my mind towards building out a private cloud. And the technology that I'm looking for there goes to a little bit of what Taha talked about before, which is we've got infrastructure as a service. What we need to get to is that platform as a service so we can normalize the application environment between the garrison applications that do the business functions, the defense business system functions, and the tactical applications. And it might not be one platform. It might be multiple depending on whether I have an application that's sitting always in garrison and has benefit of DIS's heavy-duty pipes that are connecting up the data environment, or whether it's on a ship where I've got the MU deployed, Marine Expeditionary Unit deployed, and I have a SATCOM link that I have to go tolerate throughout the cycle. Or if I've got 4 guys sitting in a hotel room in somewhere in Northwest Africa in a security cooperation environment. I've got to think about those stacks that support them. The reason the private cloud computing strategy becomes important to me is that if I can rationalize the data, get the physical and logical environment normalized, now I have the ability to think about new ways to deploy that data, whether it's using virtualization technology to virtualize that entire stack and push it to smaller and smaller hardware out on the tactical edge. That way I can give that warfighter at the edge a complete stack. It's a smaller subset of the data, but they have all the applications they need to run against the data relevant to their mission. Those are the concepts that I think are coming forward as we look through the private cloud computing environment. But I think that platform as a service piece is really critical to us in normalizing the environment, because today our functional communities have grown up their own databases, and there's still some stovepipe data there. And we're moving into an environment where the cost of sustaining those independent functional environments is getting too expensive.
Sure.
So can we give them a more affordable option that we can provide as an enterprise and let them spend the dollars that they have just on the stuff that matters to them, which is the application logic. If I can take away the requirement to go rack out equipment and configure databases and manage that hardware and conduct the certification and accreditation for security, if I can take that off their hands, they can spend what dollars they have to really develop what matters, the business logic. The challenge that we face there is making sure that platform is there and it's reliable, and that's the the challenge that we face through our acquisition organization and getting that in place and making sure that it's rock solid for them to land on.
All right, so we've described a very different set of databases, data types, unstructured and structured, and we've also described a very different infrastructure to support all of that. So that brings up the question of governance. And Kevin, I'd like to ask you the question on that one first, and that is, what are best practices with respect to data governance? Who should own it? Who should control it? Especially when there is all this intra and interagency sharing, and you've got clouds and government-owned situations. I mean, how does it all get governed and controlled?
That's a tough one because there's so many stakeholders when you're sharing data. But the first one that always comes up is security, right? So you definitely need some type of governance around security and who has access and when they have access. It's not a technology issue. It's more about the people, because within the technology, there's the role-based security, attribute-based access control. There's a lot of different ways that you can control who gets access and who needs to know. But I think what you need is an overarching plan, if you will, or some type of mandate that satisfies everybody, not just the users who need to see everything. There's folks that need to see different pieces of information only on a need-to-know basis. So I think a plan that has stakeholders that are represented from all the various constituencies needs to be put in place. Otherwise, it's pretty difficult to have some type of semblance of aggregation and access.
Yeah, and Taha, at FDA, you've got so many stakeholders. There's the public sending in that information we talked about. You've got the drug companies and the food companies. You've got your own clinicians and regulators. I mean, it's really a zoological park of interest there. So what is your approach to governance, and how is it evolving?
Yeah, well, governance is key, and there are different governance depending on the problem. But for us in IT, for example, we stood up last year the CIO Council that's co-chaired by the CIO and the Chief Health Informatics Officer, but we also have representatives from every one of the centers. So every center has what we call the ADCIO, is Associate Director CIO. Basically, this is a nominated CIO from every center that carries forward the priorities for that center, but then all together sit around the table with the privacy officer, with the security officer, and try to look at the enterprise lens and how the investment then ties to that. And this is really how we have been able to bring down our O&M cost, but also the chargeback model. As you move to an enterprise level solution, is what is it that you're using from that solution. And this is, again, in the cloud era, or even if you have a data center, you still, the model works really, really nicely. Take, for example, DevOps. I mean, that was one thing that was prioritized at the CIO Council, is this is an area where we really need to move, where let's say we offer 80% of the solution. You don't have to worry about the infrastructure and the ATOs and the security and the databases. You get to start kind of how Kenneth was mentioned earlier, is we want the business to worry about just their business rather than worry about everything else. So that's really where we're moving towards. Of course, in a cloud environment, that's much easier. We still have to deal in our current environment where we're dealing with legacy systems and we're dealing with our data center. So it's a hybrid approach, and we'll see how it function over time.
We've been talking a lot, and we've mentioned cloud a couple times, and I wanted to kind of foot stomp a little bit on the private cloud approach and why it's been important in my mind. The challenge that I think we face in talking about cloud is that the instances that will move immediately into the cloud are the production piece, and what will be left back in the enterprise is all the development and test piece. So that construct of building DevOps into your cloud becomes a really key piece to getting at the value, to getting at the efficiency in terms of the infrastructure spend. And so that's been why I foot stomped so much on the Marine Corps working towards the private cloud. Then as the enterprise providing IT to the Marine Corps, we can make decisions about whether using the DISA cloud or commercial cloud makes sense, but we're doing it from an enterprise perspective, not a local optima of a particular functional community or a particular need.
Okay, and Cliff, in the Army, you mentioned the DoD layer and the JIE, which is Joint Information Environment, so that's everybody. So what's your governance approach to data there, and how do you see it evolving?
It is aligned with the DoD activities. I would highlight we're very fortunate within the Army that we have a chief data officer that's been identified. It's embedded, or he is embedded within the chief information officer to essentially make sure that the enterprise solutions we're talking about from data management are raised to that level. Now, as a chief data officer, he's only one individual, but there's a notion that you also have to have other functional areas, because besides the chief data officer, he can't do it on his own. He has 18 data stewards across the different functionalities like logistics, human resources. But that's more from a policy, best practices, provide the type guidance, etc. But we have to align with what's going on with the JIE and IC, and at the DoD level, they're also taking a look at establishing data governance, and they've recently established an enterprise service and data panel, which tries to take a look at those lessons learned across the department, so that we're doing infrastructure, there's networks, there's enterprise services, because that gets to your access to the data, so there's commonality across the department.
All right, we're going to take a break on that note. Our guests today are Cliff Dowse, Chief Information Architecture Division of the Army CIO; Taha Kass-Hout, he's Chief Health Informatics Officer at the Food and Drug Administration; Ken Bible is the Chief Technology Officer at the Marine Corps; and Kevin Shelley, Vice President for Public Sector at MarkLogic. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin, on the new generation of databases, sponsored by MarkLogic, here on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com.